In this video, we're going to set up and verify Ansible. Now that we have all of our nodes on the network and we can SSH to them, we're now ready to go to the next step and set up Ansible. So if we again look at our topology, we're going to take these devices and describe them as code within Ansible, and then make some playbooks, that's what Ansible calls them, and connect to them and run some commands. So let's get right into it. So Ansible is an automation tool. It was originally made to automate Linux machines where you could run tasks on multiple Linux machines, but it's been extended to the network now. And you can get a little sample of how you would write something here. Ansible uses what's called a playbook, which you could think of it just as this file. And in a playbook, there's a play, which is called Apache Server installed. And then within a play, there are tasks. So there's 3 tasks here. And again, this is geared towards automating a Linux server, and we're going to use it for networking, but this is kind of the structure, and we'll build that. Now, when you're using it with Cisco devices, here I just Googled Ansible Cisco iOS, and we can see, we'll come back to this a lot, but these are built specifically for Cisco devices, and these are all the things we can do and what we can automate, and a lot of them are little specific things that you'll recognize, and we'll use these to describe how we want the network to be configured, and then we'll leave it up to Ansible to actually make that happen. This will become more clear as we see how it actually works. So like I said last video, Ansible has a Python backend, so we can pip install Ansible. And so I'm going to just set up a little environment real quick, and then we'll go over what I did here. All right, so what I did is I made a directory that we're going to work in called Ansible, moved into it, made a virtual environment just to keep all of our code clean in one place, activated the virtual environment, and installed Ansible-core. You can also just put Ansible. That's kind of the batteries included module. It just comes with a whole bunch of stuff. I like the core, and I like to just install what we need when we need it. Now that Ansible is installed, I'm going to clear the screen, and let's make a configuration file for our project. So there's 3 things here for our whole project to use. Gathering is explicit, meaning by default, when you connect to a device, it runs some commands to get some, what it calls facts about it. So one thing it may get, it would be the version you're on of code. So in your plays, you can leverage that. You can make logic that says, if I'm lower than this code, I want to upgrade, or something like that. In our case, we're not going to use that, so it's just going to slow our playbooks down if we get that and never use it. So we can still get that, but I just want to make sure we explicitly want to get that, not just do it every time. Second, we're going to specify our inventory file. That way we don't have to keep specifying it when we run our commands. It's just set here, and Ansible knows to look here. And then this is just to stop barking of any host key. Hey, I don't trust the SSH key. I just want to turn that off for the lab here. So we can save that. So we've got our folder, and we've got really one thing in it, which is our Ansible config. And then next, we're going to create our inventory file of our devices. And Ansible uses YAML files, and those always start with 3 dashes at the top. So in our inventory file, we have an all group. It's there whether you type it out or not, but so since it's there, I just went ahead and typed it out just so it's clear. And in that all group there, it has children, and its children are routers and switches. Now these are important because they're the groups that we're going to reference whenever we want to target something. So if I want to write a script just for switches, I'll tell it run on only switches, and then it knows the hosts in that group are switch 1 and switch 2. And this matches our setup here where router 1, 2, and 3, there's the routers, there's the switches. And notice I'm putting the host name. You could put the IP address here, but for the lab, I'm just trying to put the host name to make it clear, because I have this set as a static DNS entry on this Ansible machine. I'll show you what that looks like. So I just put this little section in just so we should be able to do, we were pinging by IP, we should be able to do this as well. So that's all that does. That's nothing even Ansible related, but it'll make things look clearer when we know it's coming from router 1 instead of 10.11.50.1. And then the last thing we'll do before we start getting into the fun stuff is I'm going to make a folder. It's called group vars. And it has to be named this because Ansible knows to look in this. And then if we go into group vars and make a file, all.yaml, notice this matches the group name in our inventory. That's on purpose. We can tell it certain things that'll be inherited by all those group members. So here we're telling it 3 things. The network OS is iOS. That essentially tells Ansible what driver to use when it connects to the device. And then we have our username and password. Now, let's go back to the main. And let's look at our inventory file. Now notice, if we also look at what we just made, that's how these are linked. This is the group. And then in the group vars, if you have a matching name here, then everything below will inherit what you have here. So all have the same username and password, and they're all iOS because these are all iOS XE. So that's how one way inheritance works. And so let's look at our project so far. So this is all we really have. We have Ansible installed, and then we have our config file, our inventory file, and then we have our group variables in the all.yaml. Now we can actually make something fun. Let's make something that connects to the device, and we're going to make something that just runs a show version. Maybe I want to know what version these devices are on. So in Ansible, you make what we saw earlier, which is a playbook, which is the kind of the file, and then it can have multiple plays, and then those plays contain tasks, and the tasks is what actually does something. So you can logically group them. You can have one play that relates to something, and then every task supports that something. So let's make this, and then it's fairly intuitive, especially after you do it just a few times. So let me make it, and then let's look at it. All right, so what we have here is our playbook, which is called First Playbook. There's one play which says test network connection and get version. So this will make sure everything's working. Now here's where I'm targeting the inventory group. I'm saying I want this to run on the all group, which will be everything. Connection tells it we're using the command line, and this will be used in conjunction. Now that it knows we're using the command line, it'll look back at our group vars, and it'll know it's iOS, as compared to maybe another vendor that uses SSH. So that's enough for this to know how to connect. Now here's our tasks. I've tried to separate them to make them look clean. Here's our first one, which is just going to do a get version. Then you have to tell it like a module to use. And we saw this a little bit from our last video here, where here's all the ones we can use for Cisco. And so I'm using the command module here. And you can just look through and you can kind of get a sense on, we're not doing route maps right now, so we don't need that one. We don't need NTP. Command is just module to run command on a remote device. And then once you're in here, you need to structure it how this document says. So in our case, you can see the next thing I did was using commands. The reason I did that is because it's required. And then we give it a list of commands, which I'm only giving it one thing. So the dash there in YAML means it's a list. So we'll see this bunch. And then the output of this, I'm going to register that as something called version. I can call that whatever I want. I just called it version. So now that's stored. The result of that is stored as a version. So, I mean, this is kind of like a assignment in Python, like a variable assignment. Task 2, we're going to print it to the screen because this won't print it to the screen by default. So all I'm doing here is Ansible. The module here is built-in.debug. This is just one that allows you to throw something at the screen, and it takes a message parameter, and then we give it this funny-looking syntax, which is Jinja. And so this calls this, and you need the brackets, which is telling it to, reach back for something. So that's our playbook. Let's try to run it and see what it does. So to run it, it's Ansible playbook. This is what you'll use most of the time. And then First Playbook. All right, now here it's telling me Paramiko is not installed because I installed Ansible-core, if you remember. So this is a Python module that we do need to install. So we would pip install Paramiko. And I believe there's one more we can install that'll bark at us, so I'll just save us the time. But if you see this, it's just no module named Paramiko. It's probably just you need to pip install it. So let's run this First Playbook again. All right, it succeeded on all the devices. This is our play recap that you'll always want to pay attention to. A lot of information here for every device. And we can see router 1, that's why I did the DNS static entry, so that way it shows a name instead of an IP here. So there's a lot of stuff here. We can make that a little more clean if you want, because notice how it gives us the output. It looks kind of Pythonic. There's a dictionary and then there's a list. So what we can do, let's edit the playbook we made. And version here, instead of that whole string, we can pipe into the result. So I remember what it looked like from just a second ago. Standard out. Remember I said it looked like a dictionary, and then let's get the first item in that list of the dictionary. So this might make it a little bit cleaner looking. Let's run it again. Okay, it looks a little bit better. And you could drill further if you wanted, but that's good enough. So there's our routers are running 17.6, and then our switches are running 17.10. So now we didn't make any changes here, or it would tell us right here. And that is the first example of using Ansible. So, I mean, you can see how it's fairly easy, but we do rely on, kind of coming here. And if you want to do something, our case, our first playbook was pretty easy because we just ran some show commands. But what if we wanted to do some configuration? So let's make a second playbook and let's actually do some configuration changes just to see what that looks like. And we'll look at some of those modules. So let's make this and then we'll go over it. All right, what we have here, we've got one play, configure basic settings. Again, it's targeted to the all group, and we're using the same kind of connection. But now we've got two tasks, configure logging. Now this is a different module here. So let's look at this. So if we don't know what we'd want to do. Like we know we want to do logging related, so we kind of just see, oh, there is a logging module. The ones that have global are the kind of the newer ones. You can see they're depreciated. So if you click in there, here's what we need. We need to have a config thing. And so what I wanted to do is do the buffer size and severity. So config, buffered, and you can see how these are kind of nested. Like I can't just start with severity. No, I need to first type config and then buffered, then I can type severity. And then it tells me what I can choose here. So for severity, I have these options. Now these are, of course, mapped to the Cisco syslog options. And if you just look at the code, you've probably heard of intent-based networking, which is the idea of you tell the device what you want to happen, but you don't need to worry about how it happens. That's kind of what's happening here. So I can just look at this and say, okay, I mean, I can see the buffer size is going to be 8192, and the severity of the logs is going to be informational. Now, as far as what are the commands I need to make that happen, I don't even need to worry about that. The module here is going to do that for me behind the scenes. And there's something similar going on with NTP. NTP, I'm using a separate module here. It's the NTP one, which we saw. There's the NTP global. It also requires a config. And then the next one we used is servers. Some of these are pretty long. So there should be a servers down here somewhere. And then server. And then that's going to be a string, which is 1234, which doesn't exist, but I just put an IP address in there so we can see it at work. So let's run this. Now this will probably fail, and the reason is, let's just see if we can figure it out based on the output. So here notice what it's trying to do is show, run, pipe include logging. That's what the module does behind the scenes, and it's unable to. And if we look here, we can see why. It's not in enable mode. Now, one thing we could have done in our ZTP script is we could have went under the VTY and did privilege 15. That's one option. Another option is we can set it to be in enable mode when it connects. Let's just do that, and we can do that by modifying our group all file. So group vars all. We will in here we will set Ansible, and it's called become, and that just means like become the privileged user. We'll set that to true, and then we need to tell it the username and password. Or I guess I should have said just the password, not the username. But there's three things. Yes, become true. That this is how we do that, which is the enable mode for Cisco. And then there's the password. And again, this is all, you can get this from the Ansible documentation. So I'm just copying those, and I'm just typing the password out instead of using the password vault that they have for clarity here, where we can actually see what's going on. So if we try to run this again, now we can see that it has actually made some changes. So I mean, we can verify these if we go to the device. Let me just log in to all of them. And if I scroll here, they should all have essentially those two commands, 8192 and then some NTP server that we gave it. And so they're there. And here we can tell that they're changed. Now, one other thing we can talk about is it's called idempotency, and it's the idea that if I run this again, what will it do? So let's look at the result here. So notice that it didn't make changes again. It noticed that these changes were there already, so it doesn't try to keep applying the change over and over. So that's a neat thing. The idea of idempotency is that you can configure something once, and the first time it actually makes the change. But if I keep doing it over and over, it doesn't make a change. Now, the way that this is implemented is we kind of actually saw it when this failed earlier, where it did a show run config. This is, it's checking, hey, is this in there already? If it is, I'm going to skip it. So that's how idempotency is implemented. So we can run this over and over, and it should only change the first time. So that's a neat thing about Ansible, is it has a lot of that built in, especially when you use those modules. So I think that's just as far as wrapping up. I mean, we can see what we look like now. Here's our structure. We made 2 playbooks. This one just does some show. This actually does some configuration. Our inventory describes our basic devices. And then we have group variables that matches everything. And then we've got several settings in there that we want all of our devices to use. And this is settings for the project as a whole. So that's how to make some playbooks in Ansible and run them to do configuration of devices. In the next video, we're going to go further with this, and we're going to configure the interfaces of the routers with IP addressing. But that's all for now.